Hey, if you've ever listened to our show and thought to yourself, I think I want to make a podcast, but I don't know where to start, start with Anchor. Anchor is a platform that has all the tools you need to record and edit your podcast, right from your phone or computer. Using Anchor allows you to distribute your show to platforms such as Spotify, Apple, Google, and so many others. The best part is that it's totally free. So if you want to get started, you can download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm.
Hey, bandwagoners, guess what time it is? For me, it's like 8 a.m. But for you, it's bandwagon monthly giveaway time. If you enjoy listening to Jacob speak, imagine what his comics are like. What? You haven't read one? Yeah, it's all good. We got you. Participate in our giveaway this month for a chance to win a physical copy of Cities of Magick, Issue 1. Follow us at Bandwagon Fan Podcast to find out more information. Enjoy the show.
What's up, nerds? I'm Alex.
I'm Josh.
AJ doesn't exist today. AJ is our silent member. This is the Bandwagon Fan, the podcast where we talk about all things pop culture. This week we have a special guest with us. He is the writer and co-creator of the ongoing comic series Cities of Magick, creator and collaborator of several webcomics, and a game designer, which I think is pretty awesome. We're so happy to welcome Jakob Free to the show today. This is where we
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, this is where we insert all of our
The
clap
applause.
effects and stuff in our audience.
Good. I
Yeah,
always wanted that.
Seriously, welcome. I want to start with your backdrop is really cool. Did you paint that? Because that could be a whole different discussion right there.
Actually, no, my brother's fiance did this piece. She's a very gifted visual artist and a singer, so it runs on both sides of the family now.
Nice.
We've got a lot of artists in the next generation, so it's good.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. I would try to describe this to everyone,
All
but
right,
to me,
it's audio only.
yeah, I'm just I feel like this is which is a great segue. This is like a therapy round where they send you all of the little splotch images and they're describe what this pattern is, and I'm like, oh, it's a cow, and they're like, no, that's literally a human right there. That's insane.
Yeah.
Which brings me into did you watch Moon Knight? That's what we got to start with.
I have not seen Moon Knight, but Moon Knight is one of my favorite Marvel characters and has been for many years. I have a policy nowadays of waiting till there's some sort of general consensus from people I trust on these things, because I find myself routinely disappointed by modern adaptations of stuff I love, because I it's my fault. I'm very fussy about
Mm-hmm.
stuff, everything. Don't get me started on Star Trek nowadays. I can't live in this world anymore. But yeah, no, I love Oscar Isaac. I love Moon Knight. It seems like a home run. So I don't know. Maybe I will one day. Maybe I'll take the plunge. I don't know.
Well, so that's the unique situation where Josh got me into Moon Knight 8 months ago, so I'm fairly new. I'm literally on the bandwagon with Moon Knight. We
You're
saw that you've done a little bit of a write up on the one Moon Knight series that I haven't read. I've only started on the 2020 run or the 2021 run, but Josh has been hardcore into Moon Knight, so we're I was nervous and excited when I saw that the show was launched, because I'm just this is such a complex character. I don't know. I feel like this is really easy to mess up.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Marvel. I grew up a DC kid. I worked at Marvel for 6 years, so I got into Marvel comics super late, post undergrad. And
That
Moon
makes me
Knight
feel
was
so
one
much better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I knew when I got there, I finally understood that they were Marvel people and they were DC people. For me, it wasn't that much of a divide. I just read DC comics, but I didn't know that meant I was identifying as a DC person. But Daredevil and Moon Knight, and to a certain extent, things Spider-Man, but less so, were things that really spoke to me. I really dig the street level Marvel stuff. And Moon Knight has such an interesting gimmick. On paper, it's a very crass Batman ripoff, but it's when executed properly is so satisfying and so interesting. Do so many different things with it. Even though series I don't like or haven't read are always taking a weird turn, like the Bendis run from a couple years ago, where Moon Knight was also Spider-Man, Captain America, and what was it, Wolverine?
Yeah, Wolverine. Yeah.
That's so complex.
Yeah, it's weird, but like that's the kind of thing you can do with a character like Moon Knight, and I think Daredevil is another great example where like you look back at the history of that character, and some of the biggest names on both the art and writing side of comics used Daredevil as like a petri dish. That's where they're testing things out. I think that the best example is probably Frank Miller. Just an unbelievable run on that character that defined it, but it really feels like he was figuring it out while he was doing it. And I get that sense from Moon Knight as well. So I'm just a huge fan. I don't want to be disappointed.
Yeah, I get it. And like one of the biggest reasons we started this podcast was like I've read comics on and off like since I was a kid, but I would go like years without reading anything because like I feel like the community can be really like overwhelming and kind of confusing, where it's like, like someone might not know Moon Knight, and then like if they jump straight into the run where he's like Captain America and Wolverine and like all these other characters, someone's just like, what does that mean? It's like it's very like I feel like now like you can find sites like League of Comics, and like it's a little easier to kind of track like, here's the new run, this is what you need to jump into. But like I feel like when I was like in high school and college, I had no clue where to start. Like you would just go into a comic shop and you're like, there's way too many variations of Batman right now, and I have no idea what to read.
Absolutely. One of the never solved to this day, but one of the big problems when I was at Marvel was when a lot of the rebooting to number one methodology came about. Like that wasn't always the way comics were done, and Marvel found out by going to number one every year, you get a little spike in sales, and so they got the taste of that,
Mm-hmm.
and then just did it on every single series over and over again, and that created this horrific organizational problem where now you have like 5 volume ones of X-Men, and how does that work? Like if you're a new reader, where do you go? And Marvel never solved that problem, and only like the good comic shops, where like they have a customer base that they're hand selling to and recommending things to,
Mm-hmm.
understand like I know what to give this person based on what they're coming to it with. But if you just walk into a comic shop blind and you're like, I love X-Men, I've seen some of the movies, you're screwed. You're absolutely screwed. Especially if you're like a kid. Like,
Yeah.
If you're 12, what are you doing? Like, you're just not going to get what you want out of the arrangement, which it's a shame, because there's a pretty easy solution to the problem, and I think it's unfortunate. But certainly the new number one thing really makes it difficult to be a comic reader, even for people like some of us who are like know what they're talking about and have been reading comics for me for like I don't know, 25 years or something crazy like that.
Well,
So
that's
what do you think would be the solution for that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, there's definitely better sales on the sales side of Marvel, communicating that to the retailers, and better retailers communicating that to the customer. But from a purely like infographic standpoint, I would just run the running tally of the issues on the book. So it's not just X-Men number one, it's also X-Men number one, but then down there it's like 947 or something like that. But the real answer to me is having a well curated selection of X-Men titles at the shop. Obviously you want to stack all the classics and you want to have everything for everybody and the monthlies, but there should be no confusion when the potential consumer comes in and says, I like X-Men. Where do I start? They shouldn't have to think about anything. They should not be looking up Wikipedia. They shouldn't be on any of that stuff. There should be a book that says start here, here, or here. And it should all be easy to get into stories that are self-contained. And there's a couple of those. Like I think the Joss Whedon run is probably a great example of something you could just pick up. Those characters already, basically. The story is contained in those however many dozens of issues. But don't start them in the middle of the Hickman run, because they'll never read X-Men
So
again.
confusing. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll never read X-Men again. They'll just bounce right off of it, and they'll go, no, I'll stick with the movies or something. And that's the worst, because some of the greatest expressions of X-Men can only be had in the comic book form.
Yeah, there's so much good storytelling from, you know, paper, literally from paper to movie. And like I think
Right.
that's like a perfect example of why like Saga, for people who don't know, that's from Image Comics. Like I feel like Saga took off like at such a popular level because it was really easy to just jump into right away and like almost have no idea how like a comic's even structured. And
Yeah.
I was like, I wish more people would just follow that formula. It's like if Saga had 15 spinoffs, I probably like I love Saga, but I don't know, I probably wouldn't read them, or I would like it like, you know, the second you fall behind, it's like overwhelming. And I'm like, I love that people can just like jump straight into something like that, you know,
I
years
agree.
after the first issue came out, and like nowhere to go at least. So like, all right, I literally just need to follow from like issue 1 to like whatever it is now. It's like issue like 56 or something. Josh probably
Yeah.
knows the actual number.
I would have to look at. I have no idea,
I
man.
was hoping you'd do it. Like you were like, actually, it's issue 57. Like
No,
you were one
that's
up.
a great example. I think well, Brian K. Vaughan is just great at that in general because his greatest books are not his superhero titles; they're his the creator-owned stuff, the original stuff, where it's just the one book. Why the Last Man is one of my favorites. But I think about that a lot because the stuff that got me really into comics as a reader, like a person who appreciates books, not just like a little kid collecting them, which is how it started for me. But when I was like 15 or 16, I walked into the shop and it was a good retailer and they said you should start here. And it was Preacher, Why the Last Man, Transmetropolitan, and at the time, Ultimate X-Men. There was only
The big
four or
one.
three other Ultimate comics, and so if you wanted that Ultimate universe, you only had to read those four comics monthly. And I read all that stuff religiously, and I thought, oh my god, is this what comics is like? Because this is the best thing ever. And unfortunately, it's not. Like those are all outliers. You don't. Transmetropolitan only comes once, and Preacher and all that kind of stuff. But they're the best because you only ever have to read the story, and of course, you read them over and over again, like I have, and try to copy them to the best of your ability so you can
Yeah,
become successful too.
I
But
love that.
yeah,
I love that like everyone kind of has like a different journey into getting into comics, which which I'd love to know. Like I know you just described a little bit of that, but like was that like did you ever think that like at that age when you were a kid like you were going to become a writer yourself, or like was it just like at that time you were like comics are cool, I'm gonna read these? Like I love hearing like the influence behind
sure,
these things because sometimes it has nothing to do with the comics itself, you
right.
know.
Yeah, I grew up, very fortunately having like both grandmas and my mom were constantly stoking whatever thing I was into at the time. And like growing up, my grandma would take me to this awesome comic shop, the name of which totally escapes me, in Merrick where she lived, and just buy me whatever comics interest me at the time. And I wasn't reading them. I was like, this cable cover is shiny. Like I have to own it. And
Yeah,
it didn't even occur to me that there was a long running cable story in there like that we had been going on for years at that point. And for a long time it was like that, trading cards and comics and action figures, and me and my little brother would build like Gundam models and all that stuff. And it didn't really occur to me at any point that this was all like based on stories being told in one format or another. Like and then eventually I got a little bit older, was actually reading like actual books and reading like Lord of the Rings and Neuromancer and all that stuff. And I was like, well, you're supposed to read comics too. I think that's the point. And it was really a couple like fateful encounters at Collector's Kingdom on Long Island where I grew up, which unfortunately no longer exists. Where some guy was just like, you should check this out. You should check Transmetropolitan
and
out.
probably a Wu Tang album as well, right? Isn't that he's like you need to
Yeah.
check out this comic script, and you need to check out the latest Wu Tang record.
Well, the funny thing about Collector's Kingdom was they had great selection of comics. They had like a lot of collectible issues in the back, like graded stuff, action figures, but also bootleg anime, and that was huge. That was absolutely huge because me and my brother had no idea where to get that stuff. And I mean, obviously there's internet at this point, but like not to the extent where I can like pull, I could torrent any of the stuff. Maybe if I got
Mhm.
it on LimeWire or something like that, whatever
It's definitely
Napster.
gonna be
Napster.
like it's gonna be like the whatever issue you download, and then like what was it like the Bill Clinton like there was like the quote of like Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky that used to be like pirated into like a bunch of tracks on LimeWire.
There's a lot of weird stuff coming
Yeah.
down the LimeWire tubes. I can assure you of that.
Yeah, it always
yeah.
got something else attached with it.
Yeah, it came with a lot of weird stuff.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes it would be titled something, and that's not what you were getting. And as fun as the Wild West of internet was back then, I'm sort of glad that it's now I can see what I'm getting. But yeah, so the bootleg Dragon Ball Z stuff, like in Japanese, I feel was like really formative for me because um, it got me into like foreign. This is gonna sound weird, but like foreign cinema. It didn't occur to me that Dragon Ball Z was in Japanese when I was a young teenager. Like,
Yeah, you probably watched it on like Toonami or something.
on Toonami, and it was
Yeah.
in English, with those sort of weird voice acting. And then I was like, holy shit, like this is what the Japanese, how they experience it. I'm reading it with subtitles, and I got used to the idea. And then after that, I started watching a lot of Japanese stuff to start off. But I definitely, that's like the origin story of getting into like foreign film, which is a weird way to think about it. But that's where it all started for me. And then it became like a bit of an obsession, as I'm sure some of you guys know. Like I just would pick, after reading Transmetropolitan, I'd say Warren Ellis and Derek Robertson. What else are they on? And I wouldn't go by characters. I didn't like have a Spider-Man collection. I would go by creators, and I just followed that thread wherever it took me. And that's how it got me to Ellis and Garth Ennis and Alan Moore and Grant Morrison and all those folks. Like that was huge, and I'm really like grateful for that, those great positive experiences at the comic shop, which I understand isn't always the way it works.
Yeah.
But for me, it was great, and I just kept going back there. I didn't really follow comics monthly, but I was reading a lot of trades for a long time. And that carried me all the way through to college. And then I eventually got the internship at Marvel. And I was fully jacked in. Like I was reading everything Marvel put out as part of work.
That was probably in the contract, right? They're like, you have to make sure you were always reading like at least 2 more Marvel issues over DC. Like that's our one trade-off.
I never told, in the first year of working as an intern, I never told anybody I was like, I love Superman and the Flash and all that stuff. I never said that, but definitely read everything they put out, even the bad stuff, and was going to Midtown Comics, here in New York every Wednesday with a huge pull list, like more than I could afford at the time. I was making no money. I was living in like a really weird apartment on 28th Street and just walking to Marvel every day. It was great. It just really got to things late, but I really got into comics in like a really meaningful way and saw how they were made and like who was behind them, and that there wasn't just writers and artists, but also letterers and colorists and editors and the sales guys who were the people I was working with, and they were all making it work. Like they were all part of that process. It was beautiful. It wasn't always a great job, but it was a great experience.
Well, one thing I love is like from what it sounds like, it's not like you just worked at Marvel like in the hopes to be a writer. It's like you got into this job and like all of a sudden you're exposed to like all these different like people that are tied into an issue. Like even when I read comics, I honestly go off of I'll pull it up, but like I literally went off of the cover here. I love art.
That was the hope with that cover.
But seriously, there are people I think like me too that like they don't even always like I don't even read the plot sometimes first. I just like I look at the cover. I'm like, all right, if the cover's interesting, there's probably something to go off of. And like,
right.
I'd love to know even it's just like what got you into like Scout Comics, and like I'm sure you saw like a huge difference with how like Scout works compared to Marvel, being especially now. Like, was this pre-Disney days when you were with Marvel, or is this like
I was at Marvel pre-Disney, and then they got bought up while I was there, and so I saw the switch. It wasn't like cultural wise and like in terms of how the way the office worked and stuff wasn't a big change, but I was there for before, during, and a little bit after. So I saw all of that happen, and it was interesting. But yes, it's interesting being on the other side of it now with Scout. And the way I honestly don't fully remember when Scout like came into the picture, because I've been pitching books to publishers for the last 10 years. And that's it's a rough racket. Like, I had a bunch of books. Well, I was still at Marvel. I was working on a bunch of stuff on my own and pitching to like Image and Dark Horse. And I would be lucky if I got something like a letter back or an email back. Oftentimes you just never heard, and you didn't know, like, did they get it? Like, did they like it? Did they hate it? Did it make its way to anybody?
Yeah.
And every now and then, like, you'd get, I'm sure it's not actually Eric Stevenson from Image, but like you'd get a letter and it'd be like, thank you for sending this to us. It doesn't really make sense for us right now, but keep up the good work. And I'd be like, I'm going to keep up the good work. Like, I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
And those rejection letters were actually really great in the beginning. Like, I didn't like being rejected, but I was like, okay, someone got it. And they said no, but someone got it. And so, for a long time did that. And then crowdfunding became like a viable solution. Now it's been a while, but for me, 5 or 6 years ago, I said, I have all this material. Nobody wants it for whatever reason, commercially or otherwise. But there's got to be a way to make it. Like, there's just got to be a way. And so I spend a lot of time crowdfunding things, and that's how.
How cool is that? I love
it was
that.
amazing, absolutely amazing. Because for the very first time, people were buying comics directly from me and saying, "I want it, and I like it. I want more of it." And sometimes I hate it, actually. Like, some people were like, "No, this sucks," and that was also good. That was good. Because, like, I just didn't know when I had a webcomic in 2012 or 2013, like, if people were digging it, if they were liking it. Like, I wasn't meeting anybody. And then on Kickstarter, there's a beautiful community of people who just like surf Kickstarter for comics or video games or board games or whatever. And they're, they're super backers and all this interesting stuff like that. And they're looking for interesting stuff that doesn't necessarily get represented by the big two or even by the smaller publishers in the direct market. And also there's like a lot of like goofy stuff or like erotic comics, like just a lot of like nudie mags basically. And that's good. Like, that the market should be filled with stuff, with variety. And I think Kickstarter has been an amazing experience in that regard as both a creator and a consumer. I back so many projects on there, not even to read them sometimes, just because I believe that what the people are doing is good, and I want them to be able to sell comics, and so I think it's really important. And so that's how Cities of Magic started. And for a while, Will and I, my co-creator and the artist of the book, were just kind of going like that. And I said, eventually, we have enough material here to pitch it. Let's try. And for a brief moment, it was at, like, some folks at IDW were interested, and I thought, like, that's the direction we were going to head. I don't know if that ultimately would have been the right choice, maybe.
It sounds similar to, like, I've worked in music for like 15 years, so it sounds very similar to how, like, an artist would pitch to a record label, which I've always been curious, because, like, I've never been behind the scenes in, like, the comic world, and so it's like, yeah, like, getting signed with them, like, could have potentially, like, changed the entire script of your story. It's like you get one person that tells you to change one tiny detail, and, like, that could have been enough to, like, make this an entirely different issue. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great point. Like, because there was another publisher who's been in the news a lot lately, a small indie publisher, not for good reasons, and they wanted changes. They wanted to turn Cities of Magic into a young adult or middle grade graphic novel. And at that point, I was very desperate to get Cities of Magic published, and I was actually going, moving forward tentatively with that idea. And I was thinking, like, how am I gonna? What does that mean? Does that mean, like, scrubbing out the curse words? Does that mean, like, getting rid of the violence, or is there an actual, like, soup to nuts change I have to make to Cities of Magic so that it's viable in that market? And I'm glad I didn't do that. But the publisher turned out to not be a good publisher. The contract was not good. I would have lost, like, a lot, not money wise, just like ownership and opportunity.
Was it like a work for hire deal, like something similar like that?
It wasn't work for hire necessarily. It was a creator. We'll call it creator participation. I wouldn't quite call it creator ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And I was still very green at the time. This is like probably 4 or 5 years ago at this point in that world of contractual obligations. And It would just have been a mistake. They would have had rights to it far longer than was appropriate. They would have had rights to it in multimedia, and who knows if Cities of Magic will ever go beyond comic books. But if in fact it did, I would have been screwed. And Cities of Magic is not a middle grade story. It's just not. There's just no way I was ever going to wrap it around that world. And so ultimately I passed. And there were a couple small publishers like that where it just didn't make sense. And then my friend Dave Chisholm, who put out a book called Canopus through Scout, he's a really talented cartoonist who I've worked with briefly years ago. I wrote to him, I said, like, what's the deal with Scout? Should I send them Cities of Magic? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, they might be in a different place than when I pitched them, but see what happens. And I wrote to them. I sent them Cities of Magic, and they got back to me right away, and they're like, absolutely.
That's
Here's the
awesome.
contract.
This was after the Kickstarter, right? Like after it was
so there
funded.
there was one issue in the can, and I think Will and I were in the middle of doing 2 and 3 as a single magazine for Kickstarter backers. We called it the double-sized special, and that was issues 2 and 3 in there. I think we were in the middle of it maybe, and Scout was interested, and we talked a bunch, and it was pretty straightforward. They had a fairer contract than what I had seen. They seemed to have their stuff together. It looked like they were pulling in like a lot of new books with a lot of new talent, and it was getting better year over year. And it just made sense at the time. Yeah, they really are. And the books look like this new Dennis Camp book, the Agent of World. I don't know if you folks saw the announcement for that. That's like a big book for them. It looks like they're really putting a lot of marketing effort behind it. And there's a lot of heat on the book. I saw a lot of great press, and it just feels like every couple of months they have a new big book that solidifies them as like a more than, it's not up and coming at this point.
Yeah, really for sure.
They're doing something. And that's how I felt at the time. Like I knew a few of the folks, or I've heard a few of the folks behind the scenes. The contract looked good. The way everything kind of worked out, and Will was into it, which was important because it wasn't just me. We felt comfortable, and then since then it's been really great. Like I spoke to them a week or two ago about the performance of issue 1, and it was much better than I had hoped,
which is so cool.
Awesome.
And for people who haven't read issue 1 yet, like I would love if you could even like just give us like the premise and like a little breakdown of Cities of Magic.
Absolutely.
Because I think like I love the process like of jumping into a publisher that like you love working with, and I'm sure that like probably adds details into having more like freedom to write what you want too.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Scout was very hands off. I mean, they're like a creator-owned imprint, pretty much. Like that. I don't know if there's anything like they've done with folks where they're involved editorially, but my editor Andrea at Scout was really just doing copy editing. The story was done. I had written the whole book. Will had drawn a lot of it, and they weren't getting too involved. And that was one of the things too. It's like we were going to put this book out the way you guys have made it. But the pitch, as it were, and what I sent to Scout was basically this story that was part Western, part fantasy adventure about a character in a world of magic where people have forgotten the ways of technology. The digital era is long since passed. Many generations have gone by in a world run and powered by magic and filled with all that might entail mythical creatures and fireballs and magic spells.
The good stuff. That's what we're going to call it. Yeah.
What about a character who didn't like any of that? A character who pushed against the culture and sort of yearned for the old days that he didn't even really fully understand. The way that whatever was happening 150 years ago here in New York, I don't know anything about it. I could be nostalgic for it. I might have read an article about it, but I don't know what life was like then. There was no penicillin. It wasn't good. And that's how I came up with the character Lev. He is an idealist. He wants to go back to Nike's and Xboxes and funny T-shirts and stuff like that. But he doesn't know what any of that actually meant. He doesn't know what it entails, and so he's walking around and people think of him as a flat earther, and that's really what the story was about. What is a Luddite in a world of magic? It's a person who likes technology. And I thought then, well, you have to have more of a story than that. So I gave him a gun. And I made him into like a sort of a Clint Eastwood style cowboy, and he
so
gets
fun.
involved in this magic battle between two opposing clans who have a blood feud for years before the story even starts. And just following him where he goes, he gets into a lot of trouble, and that was really the basis for it. And after a while, it really, it sounds so silly, and I'm sure writers and artists say this, it's cliche at this point, but the story just kind of took off. Like Will and I just let it go where it went, and without spoiling anything, issue 5 is so far removed from what I had imagined when I was writing issue 1, in a good way. It just went in a weird direction, and very pleased with it, and that it's a few months from coming out at this point, but it's no longer a Western by the time you get to issue 5, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah, and what's really cool about Cities of Magic to me is the idea of, it's like the reverse of what we have now, where we're so reliant on technology that like the older world things are kind of lost. And to me, Lev feels like a hipster, but like, I don't mean that as a dig.
No,
but he's like people today who like, they want leather boots that are handcrafted and like beard wax, and they want to get a straight razor shave at the barber shop. Like they long for those old things.
Absolutely.
And then the other thing was that I read your Holy Square post on your blog, and where you were talking about like how our worldview, it has shifted so rapidly with the emergence of such, great technological advances. Like how does the ideas you had there in the Holy Square, like how does that translate to what you're trying to do with Cities of Magic? Like how has that worldview changed because there's a loss of technology now?
Right. Well, first of all, I just want to say the research you folks seem to have done is great. I'm very flattered. But
we love
thanks.
We love it's like we asked you to come onto the podcast, and it's like I feel like a lot of people just kind of get skimmed over, and it's just like it's just like a new person to like have for an episode, and it's like it's like one of the reasons why we're excited. Like we jump onto everything once it's out, and then we dig in, and especially Josh. Yeah. Josh is like a pro at it.
I'm definitely I'm flattered, and I that's really actually an interesting connection, and it's definitely something that's been on my mind for a long time. I was having trouble pitching books to publishers because I was writing a lot of stuff that is a little weird. Like I did a book called Rabbit Hole with Dave, who wound up putting a book out at Scout, and my webcomic, which became a book called The Cycle. It was very personal and very kind of weird, and it skewed sort of the conventions of a lot of what was commercial at the time. And leading up to Cities of Magic, I was like, if I'm going to go to Kickstarter, if I'm going to try to get money for this book, I got to do something commercial while still retaining like the things that I was into. And so while that was happening, I was becoming super burned out on technology, on digital technology. Like I was like addicted to my phone, in many ways still am. I love games, obviously, but spending a lot of time looking at screens, living inside my computer, not going outside, and feeling this like really unhealthy attraction to all this gear and all this stuff that was happening. I think Twitter's probably the best example. What am I doing on there? What am I getting out of this? Why do I feel the need to check on it so often? Is it changing something up here in a bad way? It feels like it is. And should I be exposed to all these thoughts all the time that people are having? The Twitter user base is 330 million people. It's the United States, basically.
It's a lot.
Filled with every single thought that should not be said out loud, being said out loud simultaneously by hundreds of millions of people, literally. And it was burning me out, and it was really affecting me on a physical level too. I wasn't sleeping right, and I was just having a rough time. And that's what I said. Like, wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be swell if there was some sort of massive disaster where everything just turned off for a little bit? Where if we could just like go outside or read a book for that matter without a Kindle, like an actual paper book. And wouldn't it be nuts if we actually had to like only speak to the people we saw on the street or our family, and weren't connected in that way anymore for just a brief period of time? Like, what would that do? It'd be a great reset. And then I said, okay, there you have it. You now figure out how to just make a comic book out of that, because that will be the commercial idea you have, because you could say it. It's like a book about the world shutting off. That's it. Like, that's your log line or whatever. And I was watching a lot of Westerns at the time. And so that was really it. But I do think a lot about where that original idea came from. And it really was about shutting off as an act of like radical health, self-care. And a person who exists in that world who is trying to push away this stuff that is swirling around them all the time. That's sort of an interesting idea, right? Like, why? What's wrong? Why is he being affected in such a way? And that's Lev, but just reversed, because I wanted him to be novel. I wanted him to be me, but the opposite. And so someone who is longing to be connected on a massive scale, who doesn't see the dangers inherent in misinformation, and who wants to be entrenched in a digital world, and he lives in the opposite. And then so that's really where that all came from, and it's still something I think about all the time today. I think it's a struggle existing in the digital world. I truly believe that. There's so many.
I totally agree. And like we're one of the few, like we're like the first generation, I feel like, that really got exposed to this. Like our parents' generation never really had like all this like overwhelming amount of thoughts like coming onto a screen constantly. And it's like now we have like platforms like Discord, which is like it's even more chaotic, like
right.
Everything's so fragmented. So like I think that's such like a cool concept that you've put into your character and into your story.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I think like comics are I'll say 100-year-old art form in America. They speech bubbles and all that stuff go back many hundreds of years, but paper comics. This book also had to be on paper, otherwise the whole thing wouldn't work. Obviously I appreciate every digigal sale. I want to be clear. Like people reading the book on their computers and
keep reading
and stuff. Yes, please. but the book had to be on paper in the way that the book was about an analog world and a guy who wanted to be digital. It's baked into the concept, and so very thankfully I was able to achieve that first with self-publishing and then with Scout. And yeah, it's just, I think now it's hard to get away from, but the connection, the information overload is something we're going to have to learn to deal with for the rest of our lives. But certainly when you think about like Gen Zers and whatever comes after that, we're talking like one step away from cybernetic humans basically at this point. And I'm not saying like that in like a conspiracy theory way, like people who have been from year zero, who have been completely enmeshed in a world of digital information and not thinking anything of it, taking it completely for granted. And I think you see that sometimes when I look at like a TikTok or something with like a Gen Z person. There's a communication gap between me and them. I'm 34. They're in their early 20s sometimes. Sometimes I have no idea what's being said, and I think that's interesting. Like, how does that happen? It's not that far of a divide, but it really is because some of this technology, and of course there are other factors.
It's like a total shift in worldview just because of technology. Like you could only be a few years apart from somebody, but because of how long like you've been exposed to technology versus them, like it's like have a different worldview. Like Alex is talking about this amongst the podcast, how like the way I use social media is going to radically differ from how somebody who's 19 uses social media. And it's like so interesting. Like we're all using the same thing. We're all the same species, like not that different in age, but like it's so different to us.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great point. the language, the way we communicate, and the way and the worldview. I mean, there's this cycle going on, right? Like what comes in is what goes out, and vice versa. And so when you're ingesting information in 10-second clips or 240 character, they used to be called microblogs. That's what Twitter was, like 10 or 15 years ago. The way you start speaking changes. Sometimes like I said, I really don't understand what people are talking about because I'm still old enough to remember when we communicated in like longer forms.
Right. Not 150 characters, or it's different now. It's like I feel like it changes for
yeah, but there's a new grammar, there's a new visual language, there's a new mode of communication, and that does, I think, literally. I'm not a scientist, but I think that literally rewires your brain. I think that changes how you work, how you think.
Yeah, no, like there has been studies on that. Like I think it's safe to say it's a known fact that it alters your chemistry, like the way your brain is functioning.
Absolutely.
And it's gonna also dictate like what's influencing you. Because someone who's on TikTok 24/7, like they're gonna be influenced by something different than you or I, who maybe have watched different movies and TV shows, like World War Terminus. Was that influenced at all by The Fantastic Voyage?
Yes, absolutely.
Because that's a very old movie. And I remember watching it when I was a kid. I was like, this is so cool. And then when I'm reading this, it like brought that nostalgia back to me. And like, I wonder, like, would somebody who's like, 17 or 18, would they feel that reading this?
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you got the reference too. This is another thing. My upbringing helped out here. Like my mom is a film student, and she showed me all that stuff when I was young, and I'm very grateful for it because what I was just going to say to respond to you is I am genuinely concerned. I understand the arguments against the idea of what is now known as gatekeeping and things like that. I totally get it. I think positive communities are better. It should go without saying, but sometimes it doesn't. That being said, I do think having a historical context for whatever art form you're interested in is important. Not to say that you need to have it to read stuff. It's not my job to tell people what to buy and what to read and what they can like and can't like. But when we're talking about stuff and the way we are right now, it only helps to understand what came before and to place things in a historical context and understand the depth of the medium. Like I said, comics are in America a 100-year-old art form with a really rich history tied to American progress. Like we're talking about like mostly immigrant people who came from Europe, a lot of Jewish folk, mostly, who came to New York and created Superman and Batman and all this stuff that we now see up on the TV screen. Like there's an important historical context, both narratively and meta-narratively, about the stuff that I think is really great. And it lets you enjoy things a little bit more. Like,
yeah, totally.
Fantastic Voyage may not make, having seen that may not make reading World War Terminus better. But you're able to place it in a context. And yeah, I think having those influences makes me a better writer too. Like you got to chew on a lot of stuff. I've seen bad writing. I'm sure you folks have seen lots of bad writing.
Yeah,
I think there are folks there who just read X-Men comics, and that's it. Okay. And what comes out of that is a very narrow view of what's possible in the comic book medium. Or any.
Do you pull a lot of your comic writing then from other mediums, or because it sounds like you're a person that's very aware of like the background of like the city you live in. Like, is that you're in New York still, right?
Yeah. I'm in Brooklyn right now, but I just moved out of Queens, so I bounce around the boroughs.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. But it's like, so it's like with New York, with you just saying it has like a very big Jewish culture, and it's like obviously like the mecca of like basically every culture that's ever came to America, like almost coming first. And it's like, does any of that like pull like influence you for like your writing?
100%. Yeah. I mean, Cities of Magic, half of Cities of Magic takes place in what's called Old York, but it's obviously just New York and in the dystopian future. And then part of it in Chicago. And I'm not well versed enough in the history of cities to consider myself like any sort of anthropological expert.
You're not
or
a
anything like that.
civilization expert, like the.
But I do really love cities as a traveler, but also in terms of like a systems designer, like thinking about what a city is really sets me off. And I think about all the little micro systems that are working on each other all the time to keep this thing just like basically alive as a sort of organism. And that was really important to me with Cities of Magic. Like plot, I would say is like secondary to the anthropological concern in Cities of Magic. And, you know, as you keep reading, maybe that comes through. I don't know, but I wanted to show what the world looked like and how people lived in it. So New York City has been a huge component of my work forever. Like, I mean, again, another cliche, like, you know, New York writers talking about New York.
But it's like a lot of people are drawn from the area they live in.
Yeah.
And like, I think that's really cool. I know, I know we're already like pretty close to the end of the time of the show, but like seriously, everything you've talked about has been really awesome. And like, we're really excited to especially check out the rest of your work. I know you have 5 issues coming out with Cities of Magic, five total issues, at least as of now. Yeah,
it's a 5-issue miniseries. So issue 1 came out, that was, over a month ago now. The next issue 2 comes out this upcoming, June. And then they go monthly till 5 comes out, and then they'll be collected in some sort of trade paperback for the book market after that. And then who knows? Like,
get it in trade, everyone. It's always cooler in trade.
And get the singles. We read the second issue. It's very good. And it does, going back to like you make it feel like this is a real world. These are real cities.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that was super important to me. And the good thing about these single issues too is that we've done backups in issues 1 through 4 with a bunch of other artists. Will, who, obviously was involved in story, but who didn't write any of the scripts, wrote the scripts for all the backups. And then we handpicked 4 other really great artists, some really great cartooning in those backups. And then there's a bunch of back matter that we did. I think I sent you folks the guidebook.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Yeah, is that going to be a separate issue? It's going to be like a backup story, or it'll be in a trade? Like, how is that going to work? Because it's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to get that printed so badly, but we couldn't figure out how to do it because it's only 10 pages.
Right.
The plan right now, I think, is to put those 10 pages into the trade because I really want people to see that.
We'd love to see it too.
It was important for me and Will to make that for ourselves. Like, there's a little bit of like here's a sort of a rule book, but also like I said, I'm huge on the world building aspect of it all. I would read a book of 50 pages that was just like that guidebook. Like, that to me would be as interesting as reading a story, like just reading about the different gangs, the different technology, the different animals, all that stuff. And so that's what we were trying to do.
You know what it reminds me of? When I was a kid, I was really, really into Elder Scrolls Morrowind. And this was back when the games actually used to come with real guidebooks. And Morrowind did have like a full-on guidebook at the beginning. Like, it'd have your basic instructions, but it did have like all the characters, and like you could kind of learn about like all the different monsters and like locations of the land. And like being so young, I was just like, this makes me feel like I'm even more into the game than like jumping into it. So like it kind of gave me a little nostalgia to that kind of thing.
Well, that makes me very happy to hear. I don't want to get too far into a digression because I know we're on the clock here, but that's a huge thing for me, what you just said. I've thought for decades now, how important that guidebook element was to gaming. Like, I used, again, like my mom used to take me to the game store. She'd buy me a game, every couple months or whatever it was. And on the car ride home, I'd open there would be like this religious ritual where I would open the game box, take out the instruction manual, and then read it all the way through and internalize to the best of my ability that information and then go into the game. And now, of course, like tutorialization and storytelling has kind of been pushed into the game itself. But I thought that was such an integral aspect to gaming, console gaming, that's been completely lost. And I've made a promise to myself. I'm nowhere near able to get there now, but one day I will. When I do have a physical release of a game of mine, it will absolutely 100% have a instruction manual. It's just not possible. I won't be able to live with myself if it doesn't. It needs it.
Yeah.
I think that's an art form, and we should. That's one of the things that we have to keep alive because it's too important to lose.
I'm totally okay with that. Let's keep it all alive. Is there anything else you like want to promote that is coming out down the road? Like if it's just Cities of Magic too, like we can keep shouting that out. Like let's do it.
Cities of Magic is the big one right now. Like I said, coming out monthly in comic shops in North America and Europe for the next couple of months. I would just advise people to follow me on Twitter at Jakob_free because hopefully we'll have announcements soon about some more self-published work that collects some older stuff. We talked about World War Terminus a little bit, so that should be a hint. But yeah, I'll definitely have some more stuff coming down the tubes over the next couple of months, and hopefully a bigger thing to announce as well. But yeah, Cities of Magic is the focus at the moment, and we'll just hopefully keep going with that. And if sales are good, Will and I have left the door open to revisit it because it's Cities of Magic, not City of Magic. So we can go.
I was going to ask, can you tell us if we'll see any other? Because I'm from Chicagoland, so I'm just curious if we'll see
little Tri-City in there.
If you can tell us anything.
No, of course. There's a lot of Chicago stuff, which I should say was all written in Chicago. I went to DePaul for right before COVID hit. I went to get my master's at DePaul, and so I was living in Chicago for a brief period of time and wrote most of issues 3 through 5 in Chicago. And so a lot of the Chicago stuff, while fantastical, is sort of based on what was going on at the time for me. And then some little snippets of other cities along the way. But New York and Chicago are the two big ones. And I really tried to make like a connection between the two and have the big war in the background going on between these two conglomerated city-states. Like, Chicago was taking in other Midwestern states. And that was part of the idea. Like, what would a future kingdom look like? It wouldn't be European. It would be like, there's going to be like Milwaukee will be part of it.
Yeah, for sure.
So those are the two big ones. But if you look, there's other stuff, and we do go to some places that aren't quite cities per se. But those ones I leave for you to interpret in your own way.
Yeah, no, we're excited. We're excited to hear about all these future cities. You guys want to hear about the rest of them? Keep reading Cities of Magic. Again, second issue comes out soon. We're gonna shout them out on social media. So like if you missed any of the socials here, we'll bring it back. But we're gonna be releasing this podcast soon. Like seriously, thank you so much for having us. Like for jumping on with us. Like we've had so much fun. Like this is actually interview number 2. So we're starting to.
Oh wow! You guys are good at it. You guys are very good at it.
Thank you.
We're glad we don't scare you. That's our goal.
No, you guys are not scary at all. This has been very pleasant. I'm very grateful for being invited, and I think you guys have it down pat. So I wouldn't be worried about scaring.
Yeah, perfect. Well, everyone, make sure to check out Cities of Magic and the rest of Jacob's work. Like, thanks for listening. You can check us out on Spotify, Apple Music, every other streaming site that doesn't exist or isn't used as much. But thanks again. Like we'll talk to you guys soon.
The Bandwagon Fan Podcast is hosted by Josh Jimenez, Alex Mogosa, and me, AJ Soy. Our show is produced by Kate Smith and edited by your boy, AJ. Our social media is managed by Natalia Kokulia, and our theme song, Lush Waves, is provided to us by Taylor Lewin of _audio. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.